People say trade deficits are bad for the country, and this is the way the argument usually goes. Trade deficits reduce GDP, and when GDP growth is less or GDP is contracting, it kills jobs. It's hard for me to demonstrate how ridiculous that is. And let's say why. Trade deficits reduce GDP. Why? Because we defined GDP to say trade deficits reduce GDP. Okay, fine. You're saying 1 + 1 is 2, and you're like, okay, you need to realize that 1 + 1 is 2 and say this again and again and again. That's actually the good part of the story. The bad part of the story is when people say, and everybody does this, lower GDP reduces jobs. GDP is a made-up statistic. It doesn't do anything. It can't cause anything. It's a bookkeeping tool. What reduces jobs? Actual consumer spending. What reduces jobs? Tsunamis. What reduces jobs? Real things. So if you're not quite getting this, right, causality can't come from something we made up. We made up GDP. We just said, I'm going to call this GDP. I'm going to I'm going to put bunch of letters in front of you in your macro class and call it GDP. The letters on the chalkboard can't cause anything. They're not real economic effects. Try to spend your GDP per capita. Hey, my GDP per capita is $41,000. Go ahead and try to spend that. What can you spend? Your actual money. And you think, well, they're the same thing. No, they're not. They're not even close to the same thing. GDP in this country, and I was invited to do this, and so it's okay that I'm going to rant now. GDP in this country is about $17 trillion. Private wealth in this country, as measured by the Federal Reserve, this isn't me making it up. At the end of last year, GDP was about 70 trillion. Private wealth was 80 trillion. Now, you got to take off something for public debt, but nonetheless, that's the money that's actually in your hands. When somebody says your GDP per capita is, you should say that's silly. I don't even know what that means. I know what my salary is. I know what my savings are. Those are what change things. What you get paid, what you save, not an equation we made up that adds stuff up for bookkeeping purposes. We've gotten completely lost. GDP used to be, just like balance of payments, something you just use for bookkeeping. And now we think it causes things. It can't cause anything. So when people say trade deficits cut jobs, that's completely meaningless. We're measuring the trade deficit wrong. We're saying it's bad for the economy because we just included it with a minus sign in this equation. And then we're saying the equation causes jobs changes. No. What we should care about is wealth. The wealth of the country, our individual wealth, the distribution of wealth. I'm not one of those people who thinks, oh, it doesn't matter how wealth is distributed. I think it does matter. I'm going to talk about it more later. And what you'd have to believe for trade to reduce wealth is that we're all stupid. You know, I'd be better off if I didn't buy this imported product, but I'm going to anyway. Remember, I started with an individual example for a reason. The people who think that trade deficits hurt the economy are people who think that governments matter up here, and what people choose doesn't matter. You might think you're buying imports and it's making you better off because they're higher quality, or they're cheaper, or they're not even available unless you buy as an import. You might say, I don't want to buy the phone that costs 4 times as much as this that was all made in the US, because I can buy other things, including stuff that was made in the US. What trade deficit people tell you, people believe the trade deficit is automatically harmful, tell you is, I don't care. I have this statistic that adds it all up and it says it's bad. No. That statistic can't cause anything. Your behavior causes stuff. So that's what I mean by GDP doesn't matter. I'm going to give you a concrete example for jobs. Now, some people would say, fine, trade is good for national wealth. I agree, but it's bad for jobs. We lose jobs, we send low-paying jobs overseas, and we get cheaper goods. It's good for wealth, but it's bad for jobs. It's still wrong. Partly it's wrong because GDP is just a made-up thing that doesn't cause anything, and partly it's wrong because we can see in the real world what actually happens. 2006, the economy had a lot of problems, but income increased, we created more jobs, and the trade deficit rose. Now let's think about 2009. Trade deficit fell $300 billion. You think 2009 was a good year? How can it not? Trade deficit fell, GDP must have increased. Because the trade deficit's bad. It helps the economy when the trade deficit falls. Of course not. The causality doesn't work that way. It runs from how strong our economy is to the trade outcome, not the other way around. So 2009 was a terrible year. It was a terrible year because bad things happened to individuals here. They stopped wanting to spend. That included imports, so we bought fewer imports, so the trade deficit fell. That is not a good thing. That's the way the causality works. The causality works from all of us deciding, hey, things are going well, I'm going to buy more. Imports go up. So does domestic production, because we're buying domestic stuff. Or things are going badly, I'm going to buy less. It goes from individuals to the country, not from the country to individuals. GDP doesn't cause anything. We cause changes in GDP, not the other way around. Top down versus bottom up. I'm going to give you a specific example and send you to a paper, not right now, although some people might find the paper more interesting than me. Chinese imports of toys and textiles, and I think it was 2011, helped support, I think, 550,000 American jobs. I did the calculations, but a lot has gone in and out of my head since 2011, and I can't quite remember the numbers. That is bigger than our textile industry employment. Now, how could that be? Well, because you don't magically have textiles and toys, clothes and toys. You don't have them. They have to be offloaded. They have to be delivered. They have to be modified in most cases. They have to be sold. There has to be aftermarket, either services or replacements and so on. Those jobs, just Chinese toys and textiles. I picked that because I know China and because China is the biggest exporter to us of those things. They support more jobs than our textile industry. So more imports of toys from China do not automatically cost jobs. Now, they could cost jobs. It depends on the situation. They don't automatically cost jobs. And when the counter for a protectionist is, why don't we just move all that production back from China? Then we'd have all of it here, except the offloading at port. But we could get all the production here, too. And my answer is, while you're moving all that production back from China, all the jobs are disappearing. Why are they disappearing? Because we can't possibly support as many textile jobs here as they do in China. I mean, are we advocating that U.S. textile workers should make $1 an hour? No. If we change the price so that we pay U.S. textile workers the median wage, what's going to happen? Clothes are going to get a lot more expensive. We're going to buy a lot less clothes. One of the fallacies of protectionism and jobs is they think you can relocate production back to the U.S. and nothing will change. That's absurd. So if you just do it on the job creation you can see, 2006 versus 2009, imports are clearly not bad for jobs. It's actually jobs that drive imports. If you do it by sector, and the paper is by me and Terry Miller, it's published by the Heritage Foundation, I think 2012, incredibly simple, just went through the calculations using all government numbers, nothing we made up. Showed you the number of jobs created by imports versus by production. If you do it by sector, imports create more jobs in certain industries than the industries have here. What industries? Industries we're bad at. Like making textiles. We're not good at that. We're good at agriculture. We're good at innovation. And if you tried, which is a standard protectionist trick, to say, I'm just going to assume that all the jobs they have over there can be brought back here, it won't work. It obviously won't work. What will happen is most of the jobs will disappear over the Pacific Ocean, and clothes will become a lot more expensive. And in this particular case, poor people will be hurt the most.